We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. For me, the world is my playground, but it's also my responsibility. We have only one planet, and it's our task to take care of it. I'm on a mission to find out the greatest environmental issues facing humanity and what part we can play to make a difference. I'm getting down to earth, for nature, for you. John, thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure.
And we're at the waterfront. I've been here a couple of times and really enjoyed myself. As a Cape Townian, what does the waterfront represent for you?
Many of us only kind of think about the ocean sometimes when we're eating seafood, but here you've got the ocean right there, seals, and then you've got kind of business and shops and retail. So it kind of all comes together in this place.
So by 2050, there'll be more plastic than fish in our seas by weight. What does that mean?
You know, plastic was invented just over 100 years ago. And obviously, the rate at which we are using plastic in our daily lives is just growing exponentially. If we kind of carry on with our current usage of plastic in the way that we do, as you say, by 2050, we're likely to have more plastic in the oceans than fish.
What kind of plastics are we talking about here?
The most obvious plastics, the problematic plastics, are these kind of single-use plastics. These are the kind of things like a earbud or a chip wrapper, sucker sticks, all those kind of things. Something that you use for 10 seconds sometimes and throw away. And packaging is one of the biggest kind of problem plastics in our oceans because it's so prevalent and you use it for such a short amount of time.
We obviously hate the idea of having plastic in our oceans, but how does this harm us?
Really important to understand that healthy oceans create kind of healthy economies and healthy people. Plastic has a number of impacts on the ocean and on ocean ecosystems. One of the most obvious ones is obviously things get entangled in it. Another thing is ingestion, so animals eating plastic thinking it's food. Ultimately, a lot of that kind of plastic is likely to land up on your plate if you're eating seafood.
It's quite clear that plastic is just not affecting one species, but it's affecting the entire ocean at large.
In South Africa alone, we have somewhere around 12,000 different marine species.
Okay.
Now, each of those species plays a little role in keeping our ecosystems the way they are. You take out too much biodiversity and the whole system collapses, and that means you lose the jobs, the food, all of those kind of things. So it's important for us as people that we have jobs and livelihoods. It's a human issue.
So John, I read somewhere that floating plastic accounts for just 5% of plastic pollution in our ocean.
There are these massive, what they call garbage patches, particularly in the Pacific Ocean, where a lot of the kind of plastic that floats ends up accumulating. This massive like island, effectively, of garbage. They say it's bigger than the size of Texas.
What?
Yeah. But as you say, only 5% of the plastic that's in the ocean is floating. And the massive majority of it is underwater. And we don't necessarily know exactly where all of that is or the impact that that's having, which is quite a scary stat.
So let's talk about yanking all this plastic out of the ocean. Is it as easy as I say it is?
Well, there are some really cool projects doing exactly that. But the analogy is kind of like if you walk into your kitchen and it's full of water because you left the tap on. Do you start mopping up the water or do you turn off the tap first? And I think that is important, but we really need to start figuring out how to turn off the tap as quickly as possible.
So let's talk about what WWF is doing about teaching the average guy on the street.
One of the big focuses is got to be at the kind of consumer level is information. A lot of our focus is around trying to get people to understand what they can do and what they should be engaging with their kind of retailers on and asking for things to change.
And what can government do to also help the cause that WWF is also doing?
Policy and legislation dictate how things work. And at the moment, it's cheaper to use virgin plastics than it is to use recycled plastic. So there's an opportunity for government to engage in setting taxes or adding levies to virgin plastics. There's also some instances where we just need a ban. And I think of an example of the plastic earbud. And that's one of the top 10 items that we find on our beaches, those plastic earbuds. There's a perfectly good alternative where you've got a paper earbud. Just get rid of it.
I mean, obviously we're in Cape Town and there's an obvious water problem and shortage. How long until we have a plastic issue?
Well, I think we passed that stage. I mean, we have a plastic issue. You know, suddenly when you have no water left, everyone's like, oh, this is an issue. And I think something similar has happened in the plastic world, because until it starts to really enter into your daily lives, you don't think about it. But suddenly, like, people are starting to be aware of these giant garbage patches in the ocean. We're starting to recognize that plastic is in our seafood. All of these threats which suddenly people have become aware of, and suddenly it's like it really has reached the kind of public consciousness. So I think that, you know, now there's actually a real opportunity because there's this public pressure around this issue.
Approximately 8 million tons of plastic enters our oceans every year.
Yeah, it's a real problem. We've got 8 million tons of plastic every year entering the ocean on top of all the plastic that's already there. The challenge is that plastic does break down, but it doesn't biodegrade, so it ends up breaking down into smaller and smaller little pieces. And that's one of the biggest problems in our ocean, is you've got these tiny pieces of plastic which all of the sea life ends up eating, thinking it's food.
It's food, yeah.
You know, so a lot of people kind of think, even if they can't see it, that it's not a problem, but actually what is happening is that this plastic is turning into small little pieces, and obviously turtles and fish and birds and stuff are eating it.
And John, as much as I want to blame government for everything, it's clearly us that's throwing plastic in the ocean.
Yeah, look, I think plastic comes from a number of different sources, but the large majority of what's sitting in our ocean is, you know, plastic, and it comes mainly from packaging. And most of that is passed through a consumer's hands at some point in time. And so obviously consumers are critical in this whole story. A consumer can play two different roles, one being, you know, making sure that they dispose of their products appropriately and ideally in a recycling bin where possible, but then also like further up the line and not choosing certain products because they aren't recyclable or they are going to end up in the ocean.
What's the best way to recycle plastic? Is it a complex process?
It's complex because in some cases it is very easy. Some products are easily recyclable. If you think of the Coke bottle, the plastic Coke bottle, you know, that's relatively well recycled. We've got pretty good systems in South Africa. But then you think of a chip packet, you know, the shiny chip packets and chocolate wrappers. Those things aren't recyclable, nor are things like straws, for example. So the reality is that we can't recycle our way out of the problem. I see it as a big challenge for us to start making people think differently about the way they use plastic, not just saying, okay, well, you just have to recycle and then everything's good.
And let's talk about other viable sources or methods than using plastic.
I mean, there's some really simple ones. I've got a really cool coffee cup that's made out of bamboo, for example. You know, so whenever I know that I'm going to be drinking coffee outside of my house, I just take that along with me. It's really simple in some senses. It's just changing your system, changing the way you think about your day ahead and what you're going to do and how you're going to plan for it.
It's not something we can all hide. It's out there, it's on TV, it's all in our newspapers as well.
Yeah, so I'm totally aware of the issue, and I think for me it's imagery. What the images I've seen and the cover of the National Geographic now with the plastic bag is just so striking.
Just recently I saw a program what it's doing to the turtles in the water, and it was horrific to see this because they get killed.
We actually use those green bags that we buy at the supermarkets instead of buying these plastics continuously.
Sustainable sipping, I don't use straws anymore.
I personally try and buy nothing that is packaged in plastic.
I think we should involve the governments as well, at the community level as well, because I think in a larger number we'll have a better effect in cutting down on our consumption as using plastics as well, I think, yeah.
John, here's another fact. Over 80% of our plastic pollution is generated on land. I'm sure there's a lot we can do about this.
Yeah, that is an important fact because a lot of people, you know, they can't see the plastic in the ocean, and they kind of think that it's generated out of the ocean, like fishing vessels or tankers or whatever it might be. But the reality is that to a certain extent, you and I are generating the majority of the plastic that's in the ocean.
And are they good or bad plastics?
Some plastics we very much need in our lives. You know, the medical applications that we need it for. There are a number of places where there's no alternative but to use plastic. It's an incredible substance in terms of many of the solutions that it can provide. But we have to really be cognizant of this end-of-life impact. And that's where I think the bad plastics come in. They're the things that we can do without. Single-use plastics that we just need to find a simple solution for, an alternative for, and they in many cases already exist.
And going back to the role technology plays, are there new technologies that can also help?
There's a really cool innovation which I saw recently of a vending machine where you bring your own container, and instead of having to buy your rice or sugar or whatever it is in a packet, you can get it from a vending machine where you bring your own container and you actually get the product cheaper because you're not paying for the packaging. And there's some real kind of innovation coming through where people are looking at making similar types of plastics out of plant-based materials which also ultimately biodegrade.
How can business also help play a role and create awareness around plastic in our oceans?
Well, I think what you're seeing now is there's a kind of a groundswell of people interested or passionate about this issue of kind of plastic pollution. And business is going to be forced to respond. Some of the exciting stuff is also looking at the kind of reuse. How do we reuse something instead of tossing it away and getting a new one? So deposit refund systems, which actually used to exist, we've kind of lost sight of. Those are some of the kind of, I suppose, policy or business interventions which can help make sure that we don't live this disposable lifestyle with plastics which are ending up in our ocean. The challenge is that they respond to what you and I are asking them to do. So we've got to be pushing this thing as hard as government's got to be pushing it too.
And let's talk about other communities that are playing a very impactful role in making sure that plastic does not land in our oceans.
This is a global thing now. And I mean, you look out there and you'll see ranging from guys who are out in the ocean doing those kind of giant cleanups. There's a lot of beach cleanups that are happening. I think wherever you live along the coast in South Africa, you can find a local group doing beach cleanups, so easy to get involved. And then there's, all the way up that chain, there are interventions that are happening. I have to say, I don't think fast enough. And if I look at what's happening internationally, South Africa's not yet there. So, the only way we're going to get there is when people start raising their voices and getting engaged and active on this issue. So that would be the big thing for me, is that we need the South African public to start kind of recognizing this as an issue and really pushing for change.
John, thanks again for joining me today. But before I let you go, 3 quick facts and tips that you can pass on to everybody about the reduction of plastic in our oceans.
Really simple. There's the kind of reduce, and that's just don't use plastics if you don't have to. Reuse components. So where you can reuse something, whether it's a cup or a bottle, there's the recycle component, which saying if you're going to take plastic items, make sure that they get recycled, or that they are recyclable and that they are actually going to be recycled.
John, thank you for the 3 tips. I'm going to be very, very conscious from here on about how I use my plastic. Thanks again, man.
Absolute pleasure, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have you ever been told that you look like Jason Statham?
I have recently, in fact, yeah.
Serious?
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. Yeah.